I'm conscious of race whenever I'm writing, just as I'm conscious of class, religion, human psychology, politics, everything that makes up the human experience. I don't think I can do a good job if I'm not paying attention to what's meaningful to people and in American culture. There isn't anything that informs human interaction more than the idea of race.
Let's go ahead and get this bit out of the way at the top. This isn't the normal Watchtower Database video. If the Comicscape movement has taught me anything, it's that minority representation in pop culture is a hot button topic. Keeping that in mind, before even diving into the subject, I'm sure that by this point there are already some comments down below that were provoked just by the video title. I get it. It's a politically charged issue, and there's always bound to be pushback. That being said, there's always been pushback when it comes to the topic of race. Most people today accept Dr. Martin Luther King as a heroic icon, even those of us who only have a rudimentary knowledge of the extent of his message. However, in his own time, even he faced vicious backlash due to his stance on equality, desegregation, and inclusion for minority communities. I guess the point I'm trying to open with is for you guys to put the pitchforks down for a second and try to keep an open mind. Now, despite what the internet may want you to think, the issue of representation in pop culture isn't a new hot trend that everyone's jumping on the bandwagon for. In fact, while working as an editor for Marvel 30 years ago in 1989, Dwayne McDuffie came to realize how much of an issue this was. At the time, the company had very few black heroes in print, and according to McDuffie, 25% of the ones that had appeared over the last year all possessed skateboard-based superpowers, such as Rocket Racer and Night Thrasher. In response to the stereotyping and lack of diversity, Dwayne went on to write his own tongue-in-cheek pitch for Marvel titled Teenage Negro Ninja Thrashers, which not only poked fun at the skateboarding aspect, but also the lack of contemporary black hairstyles in publication, the weird speech patterns characters of color were given, and the reliance on pairing black characters with white counterparts who were meant to be smarter or more level-headed. Obviously, the book never got published, but it was never meant to, as made obvious by Dwayne ending the pitch with, "Have I made my point?" However, rather than just make a stink about the situation, McDuffie decided to put his money where his mouth was, and a few years later, in 1993, launched Milestone Media with the help of Dennis Cohen, Michael Davis, and Derek T. Dingle.
Yeah, Milestone approached it in a broader perspective in that they showed the complexity of different ethnicities. You know, it wasn't just, here's this guy, he's from the hood and he's got these powers and speaks in this gangster speak, but they could have characters who were Republican and who were Democrat, were gay, were straight, were rich or poor, regardless of skin color. So they showed a diversity within ethnic groups that I think most of popular culture doesn't tend to do.
Contrary to popular belief, the Milestone line was never intended to be a black-only line, but to do a better job at handling the multicultural experience than the big publishers were doing. McDuffie explained that due to lack of representation,
if you do a black character, or a female character, or an Asian character, then they aren't just that character, they represent that race or that sex, and they can't be interesting because everything they do has to represent an entire block of people.
Whereas most readers understand that Lex Luthor or Superman aren't a representation of all white people due to just how much representation white people typically got that reflected multiple different angles of the white experience. He went on to say,
"We knew we had to present a range of characters within each ethnic group, which means that we couldn't just do one book. We had to do a series of books, and we had to present a view of the world that's wider than the world we've seen before."
It's not your fault. It's like, why you make them black? Why can't have anything, man? No, don't clap. Hold on. How many black cartoon characters is it on TV right now? I name 5. I'll give you time.
Cartoon characters? Wait, cartoon characters or characters in general?
Cartoon.
I only know like.
It is
Cleveland
none.
and his family.
It is none. They canceled Static Shock. Nobody remember Fillmore. Like, we don't got shit. The only other black character is this weird ass. Oh no, they killed Chef off South Park.
Fast forwarding almost a decade, in 2000, Alan Burnett opened the door for Dwayne McDuffie to cross over from the world of comics into the world of animation, and thus Static jumped over with him from the pages of the 1990s comic to the Static Shock animated series we all know and love. While the title character was obviously black, Dwayne very much attempted to stick to the multicultural approach that he had presented within the Milestone line by setting the show in the fictional city of Dakota, a stand-in for Detroit in the 1970s.
Racially mixed but rapidly segregating, a decaying industrial base just just beginning to destroy a blue-collar middle class.
This led to a diverse cast of characters, including not only the black characters that McDuffie is known for, but Hispanic characters like Talon and Aqua Maria, Asian characters such as Shiv and Tantrum, and of course white characters like Static's first archenemy Hot Streak, and his best friend Richie Foley, who was based off of Milestone's Rick Stone, and also confirmed to be gay by Dwayne McDuffie, just like his comics counterpart. For Dwayne McDuffie and many others, the desire for diverse representation wasn't a political agenda, but a way to connect with an audience.
You don't feel as real if you don't see yourself reflected in the media. There's something very powerful about seeing yourself represented.
Static Shock would go on for 4 seasons, and while it for the most part stuck to the normal superhero formula of self-contained villain of the week stories, the show explored territory that its predecessors in the DCAU weren't capable of due to their less diverse cast.
Hey, Mr. Foley. Good to finally meet you.
Hey, Dad. This is my friend Virgil. Remember I told you about him?
Not nearly enough.
Midway into the show's first season, the writing crew decided to tackle race issues in Sons of the Father. The episode confronts stereotyping based on race and makes it a meaningful story by attaching the racist sentiments to the father of the main character's best friend. While Superman and Batman are capable of having compelling, emotionally driven stories of their own, the story we see here drives home the point that there are issues minority characters would face that white characters would never realistically deal with. Seemingly taking cues from American History X's dinner table scene, Sons of the Father sees Mr. Foley express bigoted sentiment to his son in front of Virgil, albeit in a more subtle manner than when Corey Matthews' father dropped the N-bomb during a family meal. This interaction perfectly highlights an issue that flies under the radar all too often, the minefield that is determining whether or not someone is acting with prejudice.
Richie wasn't the only boy who ran away from you last night.
What your son heard, Hawkins. I wasn't talking about him.
No, you were talking about his kind, that's all. Well, I know your kind, Foley. I've seen your kind all my life. Fine, upstanding bigot. His nose so close to the grindstone he can't see anything else. Meanwhile, the world changes and grows, and he's blind to it. Ignorant, and proud of that too. And you know the worst part?
I'm sure you'll tell me.
You've got a terrific son. One of the best and brightest around. And because of the way you are, you'll never really know him. Richie ran away from you a long time ago, Foley. And who can blame him?
More often than not, racial prejudices are wrapped up in a fear of stereotypes rather than a fear of reality. However, while some stereotypes may be backed up by anecdotal experience, they're never universal. McDuffie was aware of this and tried to break away from the typical tropes of quote-unquote black media. In 2005, when confronted by a fan who insinuated the Static cartoon played on these stereotypes, Dwayne responded,
"Which black stereotypes are those? That Virgil's an honor roll student who briefly attended high school for gifted children? That he's middle class that lives in a racially mixed neighborhood? That he speaks standard English? That his sister attends college? That he likes comic books and science fiction? That he's the hero and not the sidekick? Are there just a bunch of black characters like this in media that I've somehow managed to miss?"
All just hammering home that Static Shock was doing something with the medium that wasn't typical at the time.
Richie always goes on and on about Virgil and his cool dad, but he never even told me you were...
African American? Would that have made a difference to you, Foley?
A little over 2 years later, the creative team behind Static Shock decided to explore Virgil's racial identity a bit further, and we got Season 3's Static in Africa. The episode takes our hero out of the fictional city of Dakota and into Africa, where the Hawkins family gets in touch with their cultural roots. While for the most part the episode was a typical superhero team-up story of one hero recruiting the expertise of another to take down the villain, it also served as a meta-commentary about minority representation.
I never knew how important it would be to meet a role model like you.
Role model?
Yeah, a black superhero. I don't know, it validates me somehow.
Heroes come in every color, my friend.
I know. It's just that sometimes I wish there was a black superhero back home for folks to look up to.
Oh, but there is. And he is my hero too.
While Static Shock was a beacon for positive black role models, including Rubber Band Man, Soul Power, She-Bang, and many more, none of them ever reached the stature that John Stewart rose to through his inclusion in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited.
Awesome! Could he do that in high school?
According to Bruce Timm, including John Stewart in the original Sevens lineup was one of the most controversial choices they made when putting the show together.
When the show's lineup was first announced, there were a lot of people saying, why aren't they using Hal Jordan? No, it's gotta be Guy Gardner. no, it's gotta be Kyle Rayner. But the reason we did choose John Stewart are various. I think they're all valid. Right off the bat, I'll just say it. You know we did need ethnic diversity in the Justice League. We felt that the show is going to be seen worldwide, and I think having a member of the Justice League who's not just Mr. White Bread is a good thing.
Expanding further on these thoughts, later on in his volume of Modern Masters, Bruce continued,
"One of the things we really wanted to avoid was having a group of characters who were all pretty much interchangeable. Going back and rereading a lot of the Silver Age Justice League comics, they really are all the same character. Batman had no different a voice than Superman or Flash. They're all kind of the same character. The only thing that differentiates them is what colors they're wearing and what powers they have. So we really wanted to make sure they had a much more interesting group dynamic than that, and they all had different personalities. Going back to the original version of John Stewart from Dini O'Neil and Neil Adams' day, the thing that made him interesting to us was that he was quite a bit more of a badass. If you go back and read those, he comes across as a stereotypical angry young black man. We knew we didn't want to do that exactly, but we still wanted to keep a little bit of that edge to him so that he would be one of the more strident of the characters. We hit upon the idea of the Green Lanterns being kind of a paramilitary force, so we said, Marine. Okay, Louis Gossett Jr., Samuel Jackson, so that became our take on him.
While the decision was indeed controversial, let's try to look at it through the eyes of a kid. You know, the show's target audience. When Justice League first aired, I was 9 years old. Most 9-year-olds don't understand the process of making a cartoon, and to them, the characters are there simply because they are. I'm sure most of you who are watching this were also kids when you first saw the show, and as a result, we all appreciated Justice League and Justice League Unlimited for what they were. These young versions of ourselves weren't aware of diversity quotas or anything like that, and so it didn't affect our view of the shows, and honestly, it still shouldn't. I'm putting the term diversity quotas in air quotes right now because more often than not, it's used as a negative term. But I think Dwayne McDuffie really explained it best.
Look, the fact is there are more white characters, and if you picked randomly, you would end up with all white teams. And the fact that there are 3 black people on this team is statistically ridiculous. I mean, it's obviously a quota. And the quota arguments on fictional teams crack me up, because who's actually, I'm sorry, somebody ain't losing a job here? Which fictional character is losing a job? There's no connection. You know, they're not talking about what's going on in the comic books. They're talking about what they think is going on in their lives, and that's not really going on either.
Mr. McGee?
You're not in my history class anymore, John. Call me Al.
Guess my game's a little rusty.
Well, Chris can give you some pointers. He's my grandson.
Grandson?
You've been away a long time, John.
Maybe too long.
Despite arguably being a more mature show than Static Shock, due to the amount of main characters that needed to be given attention, issues based on race were dealt with in a more subtle fashion. However, despite not dealing with these issues explicitly in the show, Phil LaMarr, the voice actor of both Static and John Stewart, made sure to put them into his portrayal of the Green Lantern.
The creative team told me about the military background, and in my experience, most of the black guys that age who went into the army did so to get out of bad circumstances. They didn't have a ton of opportunities, and the military is one of the best ones. Also, my dad is from Detroit, and I modeled a lot of Stewart's voice on him. He's a very intelligent guy, not excessively educated. He's someone who can think, but you can still hear the old neighborhood in his voice. We went back to his hometown in the In Blackest Night episode very early on, and you got to see a little of where John was from. There is always a question of, can you go back? If you move to a white neighborhood and get a big house, are you still truly black? If you get the most powerful weapon in the universe, and you can travel throughout the galaxy without the aid of a ship, are you still a human being?
We actually got to sit down with Phil a little while ago and talk representation with him.
The whole point of diversity is excellence. Like, there's a reason we don't tell just the same story over and over again. Why doesn't everybody get bitten by a different radioactive animal and get powers? Because that would suck. You want new stories, you want new perspectives, opening up the field of who's creative and who's telling stories to people from different cultures, different genders, gives us as fans, readers, watchers, or whatever, a better chance of getting more good stuff. Anybody who's against diversity is, to me, against quality. Growing interest in diversity is not really new. It's been happening for decades and decades and decades. I think maybe it's slightly accelerated by the fact that comic books have moved more mainstream and out of just their own little niche. So suddenly you have more people taking in these characters and these stories and having more opinions, and also the people who own them seeing that there are much bigger audiences, and it's like, oh, we might want to appeal to more than just 40-year-old fanboys who grew up, buying maquettes of these characters. Even outside of the idea of diversity, people just don't want anything to change. Don't change the S. What, you took away Superman's red trunks? How dare you? Like, people get bent about the most ridiculous little stuff. I mean, when these characters were created, the world was much more segmented. People weren't exposed to as much. Now, the younger audience that you're talking about, they see so much more of the world. It has to look like a world that they recognize, and nobody lives in an all this, all that world anymore. Even if there's nobody around you that looks like that, you got a TV, you got the internet. You see other people, you see other cultures, you see other rhythms. So to ignore that seems silly.
Really, that's what it all boils down to. While cartoons and comics and the like are essentially a form of escapism, if they don't reflect the world around us to a recognizable degree, it shuts out the ability to tell more stories. It shuts out quality entertainment, and it makes it harder to embrace when people aren't able to relate to characters by seeing themselves, their friends, or their family in the medium. At the end of the day, representation matters, regardless of what anyone says. And if it didn't, then people wouldn't be getting upset when they see black characters, quote unquote, take the place of white characters. While it's possible to enjoy characters from all different backgrounds, we all want to see ourselves reflected. Look, I'm a white guy. Growing up, I never even thought about representation. The cartoons I watched were full of people who looked like me. Shows like Doug, Rugrats, Johnny Bravo, and Dexter's Laboratory all heavily featured casts that reflected the world around me. I never felt the need to define myself as a white kid. I was just a kid. It's kind of hard to explain the dynamic when you're so overly represented. So I want to go ahead and plug this video that Toonerific Tariq put out called How to Black, an analysis of black cartoon characters. While our video mainly pertains to the DCAU, theirs goes over black characters and cartoons in a broad sense, and it's really an eye-opening experience looking into the situation from a different point of view. So I highly suggest checking that out. To summarize though,
ever since I got here, I felt different, connected.
Hey, when my dad went to Ireland, he got all goofy too.
It's not like that. It's like I've been carrying this weight around all my life without knowing it, and now it's gone.
What are you talking about, Verge?
In Africa, I'm not a black kid. I'm just a kid. I mean, is this what it feels like for you all the time?
Yeah, I guess.
Feels good.
it's not an agenda. It's about equality.
Thank you all for watching, and a big shout out to Eli Benson of the Batman Beyond fan page Instagram account, as well as Drake McWhorter of the Comic Drake YouTube channel for their voiceover contributions. We're all very passionate about this stuff, and bringing together other comic book media personalities has been a fun way to emphasize the values expressed in this video. So be sure to check out their stuff at the links in the description. And if you'd like to help support the Watchtower Database, you'll find our Patreon and merch links down there too. Special props to our top tier patrons Dark Poet 1792 and Robert Sterling. We really appreciate all of you watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on other upcoming DCAU content right here on this channel. Thanks again.
Well, I think being a writer that the reader knows is black puts a lot of the mainstream, I say mainstream, I mean white readership on edge. I mean white male readership on edge. They're really looking for some proof that I'm trying to, the phrase I get all the time is I'm always trying to shove my agenda down their throat, which seems sexually charged to me. I don't know.